All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Carbon Experts Live. Thanks for being patient and waiting online. So, here we go. So, the name of today's session is Materials Matter, exploring the sustainability power of material-centric design. And today we have Helen Cheng from Turner Townsend joining the conversation with us. And again, thanks to everyone online, staying patient and joining us today. Before we get started, I'm curious to know where everybody's dialing in from. I can see already many of you posting in the chat while waiting. If someone hasn't posted where you're dialing in from, please go ahead and do it right now. So while we wait for the remaining answers to pop up, so this is Carbon Experts Live. This is our monthly conversation series about low carbon construction. And this is actually our third episode now that we are doing. And we've been speaking previously with Michaela Harms and Anthony Bach in the previous sessions. And before going to the topic of today, I want to quickly remind you where to find the last episode. And also the future episodes. So one click lca.com/carbon experts live. That's the place to go look for those recordings and also the recording of today after we've gone through it. So I'm Jenny. I'm hosting this session together with my colleague Travis. I can see he's eager to get started. And I'm actually based in Helsinki, and it's extremely nice afternoon sunshine here. And Travis, where were you joining today?
I'm in Calgary today.
You're in Calgary,
Canada. I should clarify. That's in a place in Canada.
And what about Helen? Where are you today?
I'm in Singapore.
Fantastic. And it's evening for you. So we're kind of covering all the different time zones today.
Yeah.
That's pretty nice.
Trying to see if there's anyone in Australia.
Is there someone from Australia? Can we see?
It would be incredibly late.
Yeah, there is more from Singapore at least, and UK, all over the world. So we definitely have a global audience today. All right. So let's cover quickly what's coming up in the next 45 minutes, roughly. So we will start the session by covering the main questions with Helen. So if we can move to the next slide, please. So we'll cover the main questions with Helen today on how a deep understanding of materials can unlock embodied carbon reduction. So this is the first part of this conversation. We will then take your questions from the audience. So that's the live Q&A part. So please start already submitting your questions. We'll then pick those most exciting ones and we'll place those to Helen. So this will be the middle part of the discussion. And at the very end, me and Travis, we have prepared some also challenging questions for Helen. So stay tuned to the end. So how about we'll get started now without wasting further time now.
Yeah, thanks, Annie. So thanks everybody for joining us on the third episode of Carbon Experts Live. As Annie mentioned, we're talking today about material-centric design, and I'm thrilled to be joined by Helen Cheng. Just a quick intro on Helen. Helen's Director of Sustainability and Decarbonisation at Turner Townsend, and she's a specialist in sustainable urban environments and urban equity. She has over 25 years of architectural experience, working in Australia, Singapore, China, India, and Bangladesh. Notable projects that she's done has been the Australian National University Climate Change Institute, that one's a mouthful, which they were awarded a 6-star or World Leadership Green Star rating by the Australian Green Building Council for its environmentally sustainable building practices. Helen also holds a master's degree in international urban and environmental management, where she focused on Singapore's urban climate change and carbon policies. She is a strong believer in the power of the construction industry to drive positive change. In all her work, Helen is focused on integrating sustainable design outcomes and motivating behavioral change as well in the building profession, the building occupant and civil society. So with that said, welcome, Helen. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks, Travis. Good morning, good evening to everyone, and good afternoon, just in case we haven't covered all the time zones. Thanks for the invitation today, and hopefully I can live up to that reputation. That is my profile. So I have a deep-seated love of architecture. So I think that it started with Lego. Most of you who have played with Lego, I'm sure, are architects or engineers or builders. Coming from more an apprentice approach, I studied and worked at the same time. That's where I've seen a lot of change in the industry of how architecture and buildings are delivered. And so I like to embed it into the current work that I'm doing in consulting.
That's great. So that really leads me to the next question. How, with your interest from a little kid, playing with Lego and other toys, how did this interest in construction drive you into sustainable building?
Well, I think if we just cordon off that sustainable portion, let's talk about sustainable design or passive design. It's not a new concept. It's been around for ages. Anyone that's been in the industry for quite a long time would know that passive design has been a design principle for ever since we've been taught in industry. And you see that in a lot of the architecture that we studied in passive approaches and how climate adaptive a lot of the historical buildings were. You can see it in the forts in India. Jalis are adopted in India as not only screens to look, but also screens to screen and shade the buildings. And in more introverted, inward-looking style of building to deal with courtyards and light and sun and shade. So that in itself, sustainable practices, I look at through the lens of vernacular style of materials and design principles that have been adopted in different contexts around the world. And I think that should be one of the great main shifts that we should adopt towards a decarbonised built environment.
That's awesome. So I guess you've said in the past that the craft of architecture is to make materials sing, and you mentioned some of the classical forms of architecture here and how there are common methodologies that we're still using today. When you talk about you've used the phrase making materials sing, what did you mean by that?
I think there are particular designs and to which I think international language of concrete, glass and steel don't necessarily work for every building design. And you looked, I think I was thinking about the Sagrada Familia. I saw it being built, this was when the first facade was being erected, and they were using the 3D laser cut stone. So when materials sing, meaning it captures and embeds the craft of how many stonework, and the new stonework doesn't look the same as the old stonework in Sagrada Familia. And I suspect haven't had been there for 20 odd years. It looks very different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great example of a project that has changed drastically over in its building methodology.
Just checking that everyone can hear me at the moment.
Yeah, I can hear you. You did cut out just for a second there, but I can hear you fine. So I guess with the different methodologies, do you think we are becoming disconnected from materials, like with the different ways of cutting stone, as you used for an example? How do you think that's affecting our connection to the built environment?
I think, Travis, we're facing a little bit of a small connection issues with Helen. So let's allow her a couple seconds. So in the meantime, a friendly reminder that you can start typing your questions in the chat or in the comments box. So once we get Helen back, we will soon move on to the live Q&A part.
I do just see a question in the chat there. Somebody was asking if this call is being recorded, and yes, it is. And it'll also be streamed to YouTube shortly after the call. So
yeah, and all the episodes, this one and the past episodes, are going to be available or are already available on oneclicklca.com/Carbon Experts Live. So it's a wonder that technology can do some tricks for us even today.
So if we don't reconnect in a few seconds here, should we postpone this call, Jenny, and maybe we can patch together the recording and post this on our YouTube channel?
Yes, let's wait for a little second. There's actually one question that came in. I'm not sure, Travis, if this is something that you're able to pick up, but the question is, that came in, what is the best source of hierarchy of insulation materials in terms of sustainability?
Best source of hierarchy. From an embodied carbon perspective, generally we do want to be looking at bio-based materials. So whether that's cellulose fiber or similar types of materials like that, these tend to be the best from the embodied carbon perspective. There's some cool products coming out that are hemp-based or various other cellulose fiber related products that are interesting, and I would say it progresses through, some of our high performance. When we talk about high performance products, a lot of the time these have high embodied carbon. So spray foam insulations, XPS, these types of products have, it's not so much the plastics that are in it, but more the propellants that help foam the plastics to help us install them as well. And these tend to have pretty high carbon dioxide equivalent to the product. I'm not sure if that answers the question. That's not like the full scope of every insulation for sure, but I definitely left out mineral fibers and glass fibers and fireproofing insulations and that sort of thing as well.
And actually, yeah, thanks, Travis, for picking that up. I can also see that our colleague Natasha is quite active responding this question. And there's actually another one that came in. Is timber the best embodied carbon material to use in this day and age? That's from Philip is asking this question. And now we can see we have Helen back on stage as well. Maybe we can take this question
Helen,
later.
can you hear us now?
Yeah, the sound is very laggy still.
Can you hear me okay?
I'm having a few issues to hear.
Yeah, while we were waiting for you to come back, we took a couple questions from the audience, and we were just about to take the second one. So if it's not better yet, let's keep troubleshooting. But do you want to, Travis, take the question that we were just about to cover?
Yeah, sure. The timber question, products it always depends on what you're using it for and where you're using it. Timber, I would say, if we're talking about a structural perspective, when we're looking at embodied carbon, yes, timber's pretty much always the best product to use. Of course, like there's other factors like how far is it traveling and things like that, where is it being sourced. But when comparing to our alternatives like steel and concrete, even not including, actually, if you go back to our initial conversation with Michaela Harms, she talked a lot about this, where the not counting for biogenic carbon storage or carbon sequestration, wood is almost always the best product to build with from an embodied carbon perspective.
And we actually have quite useful resources on our website regarding also structural timber. So that's quite valuable. So that you can easily find this in our library on our website. So let's give another try. Any better, Helen? So Helen is unfortunately having now audio challenges, and she cannot hear all the questions probably, so we cannot unfortunately continue immediately this second. So let's give her a couple more seconds. If we already think about what questions would you really like us to cover with Helen? Is there some burning topic top of your mind that you are thinking of that you like especially challenge Helen to answer?
Yeah, we've lost her again, Jenny. Maybe the internet in Hong Kong is not very good.
All righty. So what I would suggest, okay, here she is back again. Any better, Helen? Is it any better?
Yep, much better.
Miracles can indeed happen. So welcome back.
Great.
Let's
Sure.
go for it.
Yeah, we got a couple of interesting questions while we were sorting things out, and I'd love to get your feedback on this. Just maybe this will help us kind of cycle back into the conversation. We were asked two plant-based materials, and I guess one being we've got it on the screen. What's your opinion on the source of hierarchy of insulation materials when it comes to embodied carbon or really just, I should like take a step back and forget about embodied carbon, but how would you approach the hierarchy of insulation materials?
I'm not quite sure I understand the question, the hierarchy of insulation materials. what does that mean in terms of sustainability? Like glass wool insulation comparative to polyester bats or straw bales?
I think anything
So,
fits into this.
okay. All right. Let's just say an overview. Materials, I think, also are undervalued. We need to understand where it comes from. It's changing. How many people have touched it or, in a way, been a part of its creation? And that's one source of value. The other metric is also what natural resources have been mined to create that material. We only look at value of materials, I think, from a project point of view, dollars and cents, and we actually forget about the longevity of materials. So I think when I don't specifically hone in on materials such as, but actually look at it from the point of view of every material has a life cycle, and every material has longevity and its intrinsic value, unique value. And I don't necessarily put others above from a hierarchy point of view, but of course, natural materials are better, especially if they biodegrade at the end of life. Or could be reused. So when I look at polyester bats, polyester being created from plastic, plastic has such longevity that we should not be throwing it away. We should be reusing it. So that's where I don't think there is a hierarchy. I think we need to look at a case-based scenario to which they have their own value to impart, and how do you use that at end of life or longer than end of life of the building of its, because each material is part of a larger constituent component. So I don't think we need to break down to micro level, and don't forget about the macro level of what it's contributing to. I hope that answers the question.
I think for me it does. Yeah, and you mentioned like you touched on the supply chains a little bit, and how do you feel the supply chain really ties into that as well? Like not just the end of life scenarios, but the front of life scenarios.
Yeah, I think we're not looking at it deeply enough, and neither are we actually looking at it. We look at it in such a global lens, and I think recently, well, the most biggest disruption was COVID. The global supply chain came predominantly, I would say, very general terms, from China. And when that shut down, there was all kinds of ramifications. And, the geopolitical crises that we're having right now actually affect everyone. And I think supply chains are undervalued, and we, as carbon experts or decarbonisation experts, need to capability build. In order for us to get into a better position, we need to help the supply chain to do better. And that's not doing a top-down approach. It's doing from a bottom-up, and not enforce or mandate requirements, but we do need to provide support, because sustainability means very different things to different people.
Yeah, and you mentioned like how this ties in with China specifically, but a lot of materials come from the Asian markets. How do you feel that like current supply chain disruptions and things like that are being? How is that influencing the manufacture of a lot of these products from the Asian markets?
I think it's vastly understood. If I just set aside China just for a second, and potentially look at other markets such as Thailand and India. There is a particular way of doing things in Asia, I think, is of great value. There is, and you see it in the patterns of the culture of, I love terracotta. Terracotta is used in India in various different aspects, from having your chai in the morning on the roadside, and those terracotta cups that are crushed and remade into new cups, to terracotta being used in architecture and building and interiors to create that warmth. That tradition in the vernacular has been used in many cultures and has been adopted for many cultures. And I think a localization is required. Rather than look at global supply chains, let's hone into harness something that is specifically vernacular to be able to disrupt a reliance, a global, on, let's say, the food bowl of supply chains of the world. And that will help, when we look at ESG frameworks, capability build, every kind of, alleviation of poverty can be mitigated. And that's where it's all interconnected as a major ecosystem. So we can't ignore it. And just one more thing, having spoken to quite a lot of organizations, they tend to say the supply chain is, but that is, I guess, that narrative of you haven't actually looked yet. You haven't actually investigated how mature they are. EPDs aren't the only way to verify sustainable supply chains. And I think that is one such approach, and certification is one such approach with many aspects in industry. But I think when cost is associated and we have small holders, I think we need to actually do a bottom-up approach to better improve their circumstance to get to a better position.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think the supply chains are, I mean, they have functioned as well as they have over the last decades because they're well developed. They are very mature. And we've really felt the pain of that disruption over the last couple of years. Something that you mentioned there that I run into quite a bit in North America is criticisms of, I guess, the sustainability and equitability of manufacturing and transportation in Asia. Usually China is the one that's being targeted in these conversations. But how, I guess you have more of a frontline perspective on this. How much is ESG and sustainability being, how much attention is that getting in the Asian markets?
It is getting a lot of attention. Anyone from Singapore would know that there's many mandates in place to get to a net zero 20 position, with 80% of its property portfolio in Singapore. That is an ambitious task in itself. And Asia is such a big area, and it is incredibly fragmented. However, I think I don't think an Asian framework or mandates should be applied because everyone's at a different baseline level of maturity and or development. And I think, again, stronger economies that rely on development as an economic driver should support the regional areas, supply chain and regional capability build to get them to a certain position. So the responsibilities lie with Singapore, China, Japan, Taiwan to upskill everyone else in region, but also recognise the opportunities and the local skill set that is particular to that region. From an equity point of view, to actually capability build and upskill and poverty alleviation. One could say that is Singapore's approach in adopting migrant workers on construction site, but that is up for debate, and there is a lot of controversial discussion about that. And equity is a contentious word to use. Because you do need to give and invest more in certain areas rather than others. But everyone's scrambling to stabilise their local economy having come out of COVID. So let's see what happens in this space in the next few years. From a decarbonisation point of view, everyone's just focused on scope 1 and 2, which is energy and resource, and not necessarily looking at scope 3, which is what we as an industry are looking at.
Great. I did get cut off for a second there, but I got most of that. So with the I guess we have two different directions to take this. Where I think we can really draw on your expertise, and that's both policy as well as more tactical design methodologies. And I guess first question, since we are kind of talking about equity and policy and how, I guess bigger issue challenges, looking at again, you said Asia is quite fragmented. It's many different countries. There's different ways of doing things and different ways of looking at things in each place. So how do you approach policy in such an environment where we do want to improve our sustainability and decarbonization in construction?
Yeah, I use policy to support any debate that I have with clients. A lot of the clients are larger multinational companies. I think you've dropped off again, Travis.
Yeah, sorry about that.
And that's where multinationals, I think, finance industry, who finance they're based using Asia as a base, generally in Singapore and Hong Kong, and they have a appetite to decarbonise. They also have huge influence and a lot of investment in the area. So where I leverage policy is as a support and incentivisation. When there is something there as a baseline to say, look what the Singapore government is doing to help you motivate, why don't we leverage this to take it another step further, such as Mark here in Singapore, they look at base build. But I specifically look at the other such things that we've forgotten about, which is the churn of the interior fit out and the office commercial fit out within the base build. And that in itself has a huge carbon footprint and operational footprint we don't even really look at. When you look at Asian leaseholds are generally about 5 years as well. So that is something that as carbon experts or calculation experts in this arena, we should not only do the calculation, but also look at how do you disrupt that churn? How do you leverage resource? Especially in the context of Singapore, where resources poor. They're not a resource-rich country, unlike Australia or the States or Europe. they rely on consumption. However, I also like to think that the building industry, which is an economic driver here in Singapore, is a resource base to be tapped into and harvested. And that is, as we all know, one such way to decarbonise the carbon footprint of that particular building or that fit out is lengthen the material longevity and bring it back into that circular economy piece.
Yeah, that's a huge piece that really isn't looked at. Usually, when we are talking about embodied carbon, we're targeting the main structure and facade, and oftentimes the interior finishes or interior fit up of these projects are being ignored. How do we approach, like, I guess, like you mentioned, circularity of materials, but what about obviously a lot of the time it's not just the 5-year leasehold that is causing the office to want to do a retrofit. A lot of the time it's we want to update and make things look new, and just stay current with the trends and make sure we're looking good. How do we approach this? How do we use maybe different materials or maybe change our mindset to better tackle this issue?
Yeah, I mean, again, similar to the principle of a base build of a building, there should be a base build of an office fit out to which it's designed for flexibility, designed for adaptation. And those are the sort of in principle approaches of how materials can lengthen their life but be adapted for future trends. I think we were having that discussion of where the market goes is we go for natural materials, or it's going through a beige phase, or there's the colour of the month. And that's where, the interior has to be rethought of how do you have base build that stays the same, but it can change colour, not from paint. I have a particular dislike for paint because it's such a monotone finish and has no texture. So I think as a designer, you design for longevity, and that bucks the trend, and it's not a fast fashion, so to speak, or a magazine ripping, where you go, one for my kitchen or living room and office trend. And that's where there needs to be a more stabilised approach to this, because the workplace has redesigned itself because of COVID as well. It should be something that gives us joy and also not necessarily replicates our living room, but is it a place for work and living at the same time? I'm not sure. And that's this whole new thing that we're looking at, which is as well. So how do you stabilise and do a more, elegant approach to office fit out that can outlast other fashion trends or movements?
Yeah, definitely. It seems like with newer buildings, we want to change them frequently, but as the buildings get older and older and older, we have some really interesting old architecture that we want to preserve and is beautiful.
Yeah.
All right,
Penny, did you want to jump in?
That reminds me of a conversation.
Go ahead, Helen.
Please go ahead.
Okay, I just had one last thing. I had a friend that moved to Australia, and he was from Italy, and he loved the fact that you can build from. But I came from the fact that you can't build history again, and you can design better within a constrained environment. And that was my response to him. And that's where, when you have more challenges, a design outcome is long.
I feel like that's kind of maybe it's a human tendency. We tend to be more innovative and have better solutions when when it's in a constrained environment, whatever that looks like, whether it's financial constraints or environmental constraints or just like space constraints. We get really creative in these
embodied carbon isn't.
Exactly. Yeah.
So maybe a good kind of wrap-up question at this point would be to take one question from the attendees around how we can support and encourage architects to take a hands-on approach to work with embodied carbon. So how could we support and encourage?
Right. Get back to the fact of more traditional approaches of how architects were taught in material research and understanding the materials that we use. And that can be gained through experience, research, and using materials that you handle and that are modular. And also think of the approach of how many people have participated in making and how much energy, how much carbon, how many different ecosystems were in creating that one material. I mean, the one click exposes one aspect of how many different, you've got transportation, you've got manufacturing, you've got the mining, but to also appreciate the material for what it is. In the background of yours, Jenny, you've got timber, and that is, I love timber. Timber has, depending on the species of timber, they all behave incredibly differently. And I was having this conversation with someone recently about ironbark. It's one timber species that is used globally as sleepers or piers for seaside, because it is one of the densest timber species in the world to be adopted. And it is such a utilitarian to have it as a sleeper underneath rail lines when it is so incredibly robust. And when you look into materials a lot more, architects and designers would appreciate its performance, and that's where we need to really leverage that that performance-based approach of what that material can and can't do. Bamboo is another thing that I've learned through the bamboo scaffolders in Hong Kong, that they listen to the sound of bamboo, and then it can be bent by hearing the sound of the creak. It's a similar thing with timber, but not so much. It has a different timbre. So, this is that other thing about materials at Sing. They have their innate ability to talk about what they're about. Even down to, a very utilitarian tile. Why should we cut a tile? Why don't we design a space in accordance to the material size that we have specified? If we want a finished wall, you size that wall accordingly. And I was taught a very hard lesson when I was designing my boss's bathroom, his house, and he wanted his bathroom sized according to the tile that he chose. So he went from a ceramic tile to a glass mosaic, and I had to size it up and down accordingly. So then there was no wastage. So that's another approach of don't waste the material. Size it in accordance to the module, and the module has an origin of how it was manufactured, and also it's of why they are sized in that way, like bricks and wooden planks and how they've been harvested. They are sized in accordance to how they've been manufactured. So let's not waste anything in our approach, and actually use the material as your design priority, together with its programmatic approach to that space or that building, and use less material, because otherwise materials will be hidden, celebrated for what they are.
Thanks, Helen. Let's take one more question, because this is quite exciting. So let's try to keep this one short, but let's take this question from Nana. So which areas in material-centric research require urgent attention in the AI world we find ourselves in today? So this is quite exciting. So which areas in material-centric research require urgent attention? And Travis, feel free to jump in.
I'm not sure I have a good answer for that question. Helen, you're back.
Yep.
I'm not sure if you heard the question. We'd love to get your thoughts on it.
No.
Okay. Basically, the question was...
research require urgent attention. Wow.
This is a big one.
Oh, that's a tough one. I've not touched on AI. I know a colleague of mine tried to use ChatGPT to do a carbon calculation, and that didn't work.
I think we need one
it's an
Carbon Experts
ever-evolving
live session on this topic.
Yeah.
Alrighty.
I'm so not across.
So that's a tough one. If there's somebody in the audience who can share their thoughts, please go in the chat and type. But let's take a couple of rapid questions, and then we're done for today's session. So we actually have prepared a couple of questions for Helen, and I would hate not to ask these, so we want to place them at the very end. So last time, like I said, we had Anthony Pak joining us. And in every Carbon Experts Live, we also give an opportunity to challenge the next guest. And Anthony has, Helen, challenged you with this question. So how can we drive embodied carbon action in Asia? If not regulatory, then how do we accelerate action in the region?
I think I alluded to some of the answer to this question in some of the earlier chat about, because there are large organizations based here in Singapore, in Asia, and they are global. They have a certain approach, and they are invested in region. They are the ones to push also to accelerate action, where you can expose what they're not. I think from a regulatory point of view, that's only going to support and be leveraged. Mandates don't necessarily work until there is a time frame put to it. Like in Singapore, there is a mandate to upskill the construction industry by 2025, 2026 from a professional point of view. And that will accelerate. But there is a lot more action that is happening. I think awareness, education as well, and identifying the pioneers in industry and leverage their case studies, their scenarios to say, they've done it, why can't we?
So sharing is caring at the end. So making sure that we share best practices and not only force by regulation. Then, Helen, it's your turn. So in the next Carbon Experts Live, we will have Gilbert Lennox-King, the CEO and co-founder of Construction Carbon. He will be joining us as a guest. And now is your chance to ask him a difficult or challenging or friendly question. So what would you like to ask from Gilbert?
I think we froze again.
Yeah, I thought this was a difficult question at the end.
I think it's almost a piggyback to Anthony's question.
We can hear you again, Helen.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, we will get that question from Helen when she's back. But now is the time to wrap up the session. And actually, I have a couple of things that I would like to. So let's take this question once we have Helen back. So since we in between the discussion, we mentioned about a couple useful resources. So I want to kind of quickly share this with you. So we have a lot of resources on our website around embodied carbon policy. So you can find these easily on our website, so oneclicklca.com/library. I also mentioned about this structural timber article. So that's you can find that at oneclicklca.com/timber. So that's something to look at after this session. And then we actually have a couple other useful assets to share with you. So if you can go to the next slide, please. All right, so here we actually have the eco-design practice. That's the structural timber is part of this series. So there's more very, very interesting articles for you to have a look. And then we also have 10 design commandments article and net zero hub for you to look at. So a lot of useful resources. We'll share these after a session, so you don't need to type in everything or bookmark them right now. Then a couple kind of as quick heads ups regarding training opportunities. So if you're keen on kind of educating yourself further, we have our academy. So here we have free training and also other useful resources available. So that's easily accessible, academy.oneclicklca.com. And we actually have 2 upcoming free boot camps starting in September and October. So you can easily find the further details and enrollments for these 2 courses on this website. Then lastly, like I mentioned, we have another episode coming up, but that's actually before that. If we can go to the next slide, please, to share the kind of how to get in touch with Helen. So today we had unfortunately a little bit of a connection issues, but I'm sure Helen is more than happy to kind of continue the conversation and stay connected with you. So here you can find Helen's contact details. Also Travis, he's very keen on sharing more of his experience. And thank you also to Natasha Das. So she was very active in today's chat, responding many of the questions that came from you. So thank you to Natasha as well. If you have any questions, so feel free to come to Helen, Travis, Natasha, or just reach out to hello@oneclicklca.com. So happy to answer any questions that came from today's conversation.
Yanni, before we do wrap up, Helen, did you have any programs or anything you wanted to plug here or throw in before we close out?
No, I think that's other than it's more of an approach, is that architects and anyone that's involved in industry has almost a whole life responsibility in what we do. And I think that is reflective in, the whole life LCA approach, that whatever we do will have unintended consequences. So we do need to consider things up front. And every step of the way, we will have an impact in some shape or form. So it's more of an approach rather than to try and plug a program.
Thank you for sharing those wise words at the end. Anything, Travis, you want to share before we wrap up?
Nothing directly from me. I think I think some of the things that Helen spoke about are amazing, especially the interior design aspect. I think that's something that's very largely overlooked in our space. And One Click does have tools specifically geared towards that, but it's as I think as an industry as a whole, that's something that we really do overlook and really need some attention. So. I'd love to talk to more people about that. So, Helen, thanks for shining some light on that. I appreciate that.
Great, thanks. Thanks for the invite. I apologize for my technology issues.
Yeah, these things happen. But thanks, Helen, for taking the time to join the conversation. And thanks, Travis, for hosting and also being flexible and patient during the whole session. And like I said, Gilbert is joining next time. We'll take, Helen, your question to him after we wrap up. And thank you, everyone joining online. Thank you for being active, sharing questions, comments, and also being patient during the whole session. I'll hope to see you next time, so Wednesday, 19th of July. And go and have a look at the further details and sign up oneclicklca.com/Carbon Experts Live. And with that, I want to say thank you. Have a good day, evening, day, wherever you are based. And I'll see you next time. Bye-bye, everyone.